In the aftermath of the Roman withdrawal from Britain in the early 5th century AD, death came swiftly to the originally Celtic, now Romanised province. At first it came from the wild tracts of uncharted forest land to the north, in the form of the Picts, but later still it came on longships and brought with it the worship of Norse gods. These originally mercenary warriors were Angles, Saxons, Jutes, Frisians, and various other Germanic peoples from just across the Channel. They sought land and wealth, and a new life in the formerly Roman province. At first they mostly consisted of large groups of heavily armed warriors, infamous pirates. They came mostly from villages scattered along the coastlines of Denmark and northern Germany, from where they had raided land on both sides of the Channel for centuries. The Romans had long paid them to fight in their armies as auxiliaries, and now the Western Empire was crumbling, and uncertainty filled the continent. By the time the Romans pulled out of Britain in the late 4th and early 5th centuries to fight against incursions from warlike peoples much closer to their continental heartlands, Saxons may have already been coming to Britain for decades, if not centuries. The traditional tale related by the semi-legendary Anglo-Saxon chronicle talks of a certain Brittonic king in the mid-5th century named Vortigern, who invited Saxon mercenaries from across the sea to aid him against Pictish raids from modern-day Scotland. Like the Romans before him, he sought to use a military solution to solve a military problem, specifically in the form of two brothers, Hengist and Horsa, who were said to rule the various Germanic peoples. The Saxons are said to have adequately dealt with the Northerners, but not content with the spoils of war, they then sought lands of their own with which to settle, and rebelled against Vortigern. One story relates how at an unarmed parley between the Saxons and the Britons at Stonehenge in the mid-5th century, the Brittonic nobility were massacred by concealed knives hidden upon the newcomers. These long blades, named seax, were where the Saxons got their name, and no matter how they originally got to Britain, they were now here to stay. Whilst the first major migrations had likely consisted almost entirely of warriors, the later ones were much larger and included women and children, or so the story goes. They were given, or carved out for themselves, the far south-easterly point of Britain to rule, the land now known as Kent. But soon enough, as word spread far and wide throughout the continent of Britain's soft underbelly, tens of thousands of battle-hardened warriors now flocked to carve themselves out a kingdom. This period is hazy, and we don't know exactly what happened, although the archaeological evidence does suggest a fairly swift change in culture and language from Romano-Brittonic, which was pushed to the peripheries of Wales, Cornwall and Cumbria, to a Germanic one. The Anglo-Saxon chronicles relate how West Saxons pushed deep into the country, forming the nation of Wessex. The Angles, on the other hand, mostly landed on the eastern coastline and formed the nations which would go on to become Northumbria, East Anglia and Mercia. Finally, the Jutes inhabited the most ancient of the kingdoms, Kent, a land distinct in culture from the rest, and unique in being the only Jutish realm. By the year 589, after the initial hazy period of warfare and mass migration which followed the Roman withdrawal from Britain, an important ruler surfaces in Kent, named Æthelberht. He is one of the first reliable mentions of a ruler in Anglo-Saxon England. Bede calls him a Bretwalder, or Briton ruler, which signified his success in ruling over other nations besides his own. Reportedly the third king to hold that title. He was also the first Anglo-Saxon king to convert to Christianity, which is precisely why we know so much about him. It isn't known exactly how Æthelbert came to the throne, as there are very little records from this period, and the ones that we do have are often fairly questionable. Æthelbert may have been a descendant of the famous warlord Hengist, just one of many who had managed to carve themselves out a hereditary kingdom in England. Most importantly for us, Æthelbert is said to have been the first convert to Christianity, and crucially, Bede writes a great deal about his life as a result. He may have been born in around 560, as the son of King Eomenric, a ruler with ties to the continent. We know that Æthelbert was married to Bertha, the daughter of the Frankish king Charibert, which thus signified an alliance with the most powerful state in Europe at the time, and one which he would use to gain power in Britain for the rest of his reign. In the year 597, Augustine, a Benedictine monk, was sent to Kent to spread the word of God. Under Augustine's guidance and Æthelbert's instruction, many churches were established throughout the land, and the people began to gradually convert to Christianity. His kingdom was rich, and possibly the most well-established and oldest, and thus enjoyed a monopoly over trade to the continent at the time. Æthelbert introduced a standardised currency, likely the first of its kind in Anglo-Saxon England, and he wrote a law code in Germanic, which was also likely the first of its kind. Kent may have been split into two kingdoms during this time, which could be one reason why he is referred to as a Bretwalder, or Briton ruler. As the king of East Kent, which was traditionally the stronger of the two kingdoms and the first established, he may have also been able to exert influence over foreign rulers in the rest of the island, specifically in East Anglia, Northumbria and Mercia. This could be another explanation for why he is called Bretwalder. Writing 200 years later, Bede describes Ethelbert's capital at Canterbury as a metropolis. Never one for modesty when describing kings he favoured, we can nevertheless imagine that Canterbury was a large settlement for the time. Frankish influences can be detected in the grave goods discovered from this period, which suggests rich trade with the mainland. There may have even been direct settlement from the Franks in Kent during this time. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle reports Æthelberht as fighting a battle against the previous Bretwalder, Ceawlin of Wessex, in 568. Æthelberht reportedly lost the battle and was driven back to Kent, and it's unclear what happens next. But by 608, Æthelberht seems to have been the dominant king who Bede speaks of, and his influence may have extended over the other Anglo-Saxon kings. This is the period when he is said to have begun spreading Christianity throughout England, supposedly persuading fellow kings such as Sæbert of Essex to join him. Raedwald of East Anglia, the ruler that many suspect is the one whose spectacular grave goods were found at Sutton Hoo in 1939, also converted to Christianity during this time, possibly on instruction from Æthelberht. However, as the Sutton Hoo ship burial suggests, he did not fully give up his pagan beliefs, rather incorporating Christianity alongside them. Whilst Raedwald is said to have retained control of his military, Bede states that Æthelberht's power was so great that he held overall imperium over the East Anglian king. Unfortunately, we know next to nothing of the kingdom of Sussex during this period, and no evidence remains of Æthelberht's influence extending into Mercia, Northumbria or Wessex. Æthelbert died in 616 and his son Eadbald succeeded him. He was a pagan, and although he converted to Christianity later in his life, Kent would never again enjoy such dominance over the other kingdoms as it had supposedly enjoyed under Æthelbert. The Kingdom of Kent existed until the 9th century, at various times dominated by Mercia and Wessex, until they were all eventually incorporated into the Kingdom of England. Æthelbert, although largely forgotten today, was historically regarded as a saint for his role in establishing Christianity amongst the Anglo-Saxons.